Heavenly Father, I pray for everyone watching this video right now. May you bless them with peace, joy, and breakthroughs in their lives. Amen. Hello, my wonderful family. I am so glad and grateful to have you here with me today. Your support means the world, and I truly don't take it for granted. Before we dive into today's powerful story, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts, and of course, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update from this channel. The doctors say you may never walk again. Alexander Thorne let the neurologist's words hang in the sterile hospital air, watching his fiancée Victoria's perfectly sculpted face through half-closed eyes. He'd been conscious for 3 minutes now, but something inside him, some instinct honed by years of betrayal in boardrooms and bedrooms, kept him silent, observing. How long until we know for certain? Victoria's voice carried that particular strain he'd heard her use when discussing quarterly projections that fell short of expectations. Not until he recovers. Until we know for certain. The thought sliced through him sharper than any physical pain from the staged car accident. 3 hours ago, Alexander had orchestrated the most elaborate test of his life. What had started as a minor fender bender with a hired stunt driver had evolved, with the help of a bought and paid for medical team, into a complete spinal injury simulation. He'd needed to know, know, if Victoria Ashworth loved Alexander Thorne or just his 9-figure bank account. The next 72 hours will be critical, Dr. Matthews continued, playing his part flawlessly. There's significant swelling around the L1 vertebrae. Even if sensation returns, he may face months of rehabilitation. Possibly years. Alexander felt Victoria's hand slip away from his arm. There it is. I should call his sister, Victoria said, her heels already clicking toward the door. Sarah will want to know immediately. The moment her footsteps faded down the corridor, Alexander's eyes snapped open. Dr. Matthews immediately dropped his professional facade, glancing nervously at the door. Sir, I have to ask again. Are you certain about this deception? The legal implications alone. Money solves legal implications, Doctor. What it apparently can't solve is buying genuine human decency. Alexander's voice came out rougher than he'd intended, the weight of Victoria's reaction settling into his chest like concrete. A soft knock interrupted them. Mr. Thorne? I'm sorry to disturb you. The voice belonged to Elena Vasquez, the household staff member who'd been assigned to coordinate his care during what was supposed to be his recovery. She was probably the only person in his employ who'd never asked him for anything. No raise, no favor, no introduction to his wealthy friends. Come in, he managed, settling back into his paralysis performance. Elena entered carrying a small bag, her dark eyes immediately finding his face with a concern so genuine it made something in his chest tighten. Unlike Victoria, who'd spent their 3-year relationship perfecting her camera-ready bedside manner, Elena simply pulled a chair close to his bed and sat down as if settling in for a long watch. Your cook mentioned you haven't eaten since yesterday morning, she said quietly, unpacking homemade soup from a thermos. I know hospital food is terrible, so I made this. It's nothing fancy, just chicken and rice, the way my grandmother used to make when I was sick. Alexander stared at her, this woman who cleaned his house and managed his household staff, who'd just spent her own time and money to bring him soup because she was worried about his appetite. When was the last time Victoria had noticed whether he'd eaten? That's very kind of you, but I'm not sure I can. He gestured weakly toward his lower body. Elena's expression softened with understanding, not pity. We'll figure it out together. I helped care for my uncle after his stroke for 2 years. You learn to adapt. Together. As she carefully positioned a pillow behind his head and began spooning the warm broth, Alexander found himself studying her face. Elena couldn't have been more than 28, with laugh lines that spoke of genuine joy rather than social obligation. Her hands were gentle but confident, and she hummed softly under her breath, some Spanish lullaby that made the sterile hospital room feel almost homey. Elena, he said quietly. Yes, Mr. Thorne? Has anyone ever told you that you have extraordinary hands? She paused, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. My mother used to say I had healing hands. She was probably just being nice. Mothers usually are. The words slipped out before he could stop them, carrying more weight than he'd intended. His own mother had died when he was 12, leaving him to navigate his father's emotional wasteland alone. Elena's eyes met his, and for a moment, something passed between them. An understanding that went beyond employer and employee, beyond rich and poor, beyond the elaborate lie he was living. His phone buzzed. A text from Victoria. Asterisk, flying to Paris for the Cartier launch. We'll be back when you're feeling better. Love you. Asterisk, when you're feeling better. Not I'll stay until you're better, or I'll cancel everything to be with you. When? As if sensing his distress, Elena glanced at his phone. Bad news. Alexander looked at this woman who'd given up her evening to bring him soup, who was sitting in an uncomfortable hospital chair simply because she thought he might need company, and made a decision that would change everything. Elena, can I ask you something? Of course. If someone you cared about was hurt, really hurt, and might never be the same, would you stay? She didn't hesitate. Love isn't something you do when it's convenient, Mr. Thorne. It's what you do when everything falls apart, and staying is the hardest thing in the world. The words hit him like a physical blow. Here was his answer, delivered by a woman who had no idea she was participating in his test. And the most devastating part? She was giving him her truth for free, while the woman wearing his 4.2-carat engagement ring had already boarded a plane to Paris. Elena, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Yes. Would you mind staying a little longer? I don't want to be alone right now. Her smile could have powered the entire hospital. I wasn't planning on leaving anyway. As she settled back into her chair, continuing to hum that Spanish lullaby, Alexander Thorne realized that his elaborate test had revealed something he'd never expected to find. The possibility that love, real love, might have been living under his own roof all along. But outside his hospital room, heels clicked purposefully down the corridor, and Victoria's voice carried through her phone conversation. Yes, I understand the timing is terrible, but if he's really paralyzed, let's just say I need to explore my options. The test was working perfectly. Alexander just wasn't sure he was prepared for all the answers it would reveal. Asterisk welcome, friends, to a story about the lies we tell to find truth, and the unexpected places where love chooses to bloom. Sometimes the greatest revelations come not from what people do when they think we're watching, but from what they do when they believe no one will ever know. 3 days later, Alexander's penthouse had been transformed into a medical facility that would have impressed most hospitals. Physical therapy equipment crowded his study, a hospital bed dominated his master suite, and round-the-clock nurses rotated shifts with military precision. Elena had somehow become the coordinator of it all. The physical therapist will be here at 2, she said, checking items off a list that seemed to grow longer each day. Dr. Peterson wants to discuss the experimental treatment options at 3:30, and your business partner Marcus called about the Shanghai deal. He said it can wait until you're ready. Alexander watched her from his wheelchair, marveling at how she'd slipped so naturally into this caretaker role. No one had asked her to manage his care. She'd simply seen what needed to be done and done it. In the 3 years Victoria had lived in this penthouse, she'd never once organized anything more complicated than a dinner reservation. Elena, you don't have to. Mr. Thorne. She looked up from her list, her expression gentle but firm. My uncle spent 18 months believing he was a burden to everyone who loved him. Don't you start thinking that way. The comparison stung because it was exactly what he'd been thinking. Not about being a burden, he knew his wealth insulated him from that particular worry, but about whether anyone would choose to stay with damaged goods. Tell me about your uncle, he said, genuinely curious. Elena's face softened. Roberto. He was a mechanic, had hands that could fix anything. After his stroke, he couldn't even hold a wrench steady. He used to cry when he thought no one was watching. She moved closer, adjusting his blanket with practiced care. But you know what? Teaching him to write with his left hand, helping him relearn how to tie his shoes. Those became some of the most precious moments of my life. Love doesn't diminish when someone needs help, Mr. Thorne. Sometimes it just gets deeper. Before Alexander could respond, his sister Sarah burst through the front door with the dramatic flair that had made her a successful Broadway producer. Alex! Sarah's voice echoed through the penthouse as her heels clicked rapidly across the marble foyer. I came as soon as I could get away from rehearsals. The new lead can't remember his lines, the choreographer is having a nervous breakdown, and don't get me started on the investors. She stopped short when she saw him in the wheelchair, her theatrical energy deflating like a punctured balloon. Hello, Sarah. Alexander had been dreading this moment. Sarah was the only person who'd ever been able to read him completely, and maintaining his deception around her would require Academy Award-level acting. Oh, Alex. Sarah knelt beside his wheelchair, taking his hands in hers. I'm so sorry. Victoria told me about the accident, but seeing you like this. Her voice cracked with genuine emotion. Victoria told her. Interesting that his fiancée had found time to call his sister, but hadn't managed to visit him once since that first day. Where is Victoria, anyway? Sarah asked as if reading his thoughts. I assumed she'd be here hovering. Elena, who'd been quietly organizing medical supplies, froze. Alexander caught the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her hands stilled on the bottles of medication. She's in Paris, Alexander said carefully. The Cartier launch. Sarah's expression hardened. She's at a jewelry launch while you're learning to live in a wheelchair? Sarah. No, Alex. I've bitten my tongue about Victoria for 3 years, but this is unacceptable. When David broke his leg skiing, I canceled 6 meetings and a gallery opening to stay with him for 2 days. Victoria can't postpone a shopping trip? Elena turned away, busying herself with unnecessary tasks, but Alexander could see the conflict playing across her face. She clearly had opinions about Victoria's absence, but was too professional to voice them. His phone buzzed. Another text from Victoria, this one including photos of her at the Cartier event, dripping in diamonds and champagne, arm in arm with other wealthy socialites. The caption read, missing you. Hopefully this ends soon. Red heart, hopefully this ends soon. Not hopefully you heal soon, or hopefully you recover soon. This, as if his paralysis were an inconvenient social event she had to endure. Sarah glanced at his phone, and her jaw tightened. Alex, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Okay, do you really believe Victoria loves you, or do you think she loves what you can provide for her? The question hung in the air like smoke. Alexander felt Elena's attention sharpen, though she continued her work with careful deliberation. Why would you ask that? Sarah sighed, settling into the chair beside him. Because I love you, and I've watched you build walls around your heart ever since Rebecca. Rebecca, the name hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't thought about his ex-wife in months, but suddenly the old wounds felt fresh. Rebecca, who'd sworn to love him through everything, right up until the moment she'd emptied their joint accounts and disappeared with his former business partner. Rebecca was different, he said quietly. Was she? Sarah's voice was gentle but relentless. Wealthy family, perfect pedigree, said all the right things about loving you for who you were? Elena had gone completely still, and Alexander realized she was listening to every word. Good. Let her hear about his spectacular failures in love. Let her understand why trust came so hard for him. Victoria isn't Rebecca, he said, though the words felt hollow. Isn't she? Alex, when was the last time Victoria did something for you that cost her something? When was the last time she sacrificed anything for your happiness? Before he could answer, Elena spoke up quietly. I should give you privacy for this conversation. She started toward the door, but Alexander's voice stopped her. Stay, please. Elena turned back, uncertainty flickering across her face. Mr. Thorne, this seems like family business. You're caring for me 18 hours a day. That makes it your business too. The words surprised him with their honesty. When had Elena become so essential to his daily existence? Sarah studied Elena with new interest. You're Elena, right? Victoria mentioned you were helpful. Something in Sarah's tone suggested Victoria's description hadn't been particularly flattering. I try to be, Elena said simply. Alex told me you brought him homemade soup at the hospital. That was thoughtful. Elena blushed. It was nothing special. It was everything special, Alexander said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. No one's made me soup since our mother died. The admission created a moment of profound silence. Sarah's eyes widened, not just at the sentiment, but at the raw vulnerability in her brother's voice. Elena looked stunned, as if she'd never considered that her simple act of kindness could carry such weight. Alexander's phone rang, shattering the moment. Victoria's name flashed on the screen. Answer it, Sarah said. Put it on speaker. Sarah, I want to hear how the woman who's supposed to marry you talks to you when you're at your lowest point. Against his better judgment, Alexander answered and switched to speaker. Alex, darling, how are you feeling? Victoria's voice was bright, cheerful, and completely wrong for the situation. I've been better. I'm sure. Listen, I have the most amazing news. I met the most influential gallery owner here, and she wants to feature some of your contemporary pieces in her next show. Isn't that wonderful? Your contemporary pieces. The art collection he'd spent 15 years building, that she was now casually offering to business contacts. That's nice, Victoria. I knew you'd be excited. Oh, and I extended my trip by a few days. There's this incredible vineyard tour, and you know how you love wine. I'll bring you back something special. Sarah's face had gone dangerously pale. Elena was staring at the phone as if it had grown fangs. When are you coming home? Alexander asked. Well, that depends. How are you feeling? Are you getting sensation back yet? The question felt like a knife between his ribs. She wasn't asking because she cared about his recovery. She was asking because she wanted to know when her inconvenience would end. It's too early to tell. A pause. Then, oh, well, I'm sure it'll all work out eventually. I should run. We're late for dinner at the ambassador's residence. Love you. The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah looked murderous. Elena looked heartbroken, not for herself, but for him. Alex, Sarah said carefully, please tell me you see what just happened. He saw it. He'd seen it from the moment Victoria's hand had slipped away from his arm in that hospital room. But hearing it confirmed so publicly, in front of Elena, the woman who'd spent 3 days anticipating his every need, made the betrayal feel complete. She's scared, he said weakly. People handle trauma differently. No, Elena said quietly, then looked up in surprise, as if she hadn't meant to speak aloud. No, Alexander encouraged. Elena glanced between him and Sarah, clearly wrestling with whether to voice her thoughts. Forgive me, but when someone you love is hurt, you don't get scared. You get fierce. You don't think about wine tours and gallery openings. You think about what they need to get better, and you figure out how to provide it. Sarah smiled for the first time since arriving. I like her. Alexander found himself studying Elena's face, the passionate conviction in her eyes, the slight flush in her cheeks from speaking so boldly. When had he stopped noticing how beautiful she was? His phone buzzed with another text from Victoria. This time it was a photo of her at an expensive restaurant, laughing with a group of people he didn't recognize. The timestamp showed it had been taken while she was supposedly talking to him. She'd been at dinner when she called. She'd stepped away from her social evening just long enough to check on his progress toward recovery, then returned to her champagne and new friends. Elena, he said quietly. Yes, Mr. Thorne? Thank you for being honest with me. She nodded, but he could see the worry in her eyes, the fear that she'd overstepped, that she'd spoken too boldly to her employer. She had no idea that her honesty was the first genuine thing he'd heard from a woman in years. But as Sarah began detailing exactly what she thought of Victoria's behavior, and Elena quietly excused herself to prepare his dinner, Alexander realized his test had revealed something devastating. The woman he'd planned to marry was exactly as shallow as he'd feared. The woman he was falling for had no idea he could walk. And tomorrow, Victoria would be returning home with expectations of a grieving, dependent fiancé, while Elena continued caring for him with a devotion that was becoming harder to deserve with each passing lie. The test was working perfectly. It was also destroying him. Victoria returned on a Tuesday morning with enough luggage to outfit a small army and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Darling, she swept into the penthouse like a force of nature, depositing kisses on Alexander's cheeks that felt more like business transactions than affection. I've missed you terribly. How are you feeling? Any improvements? Alexander watched her carefully choreographed performance from his wheelchair, Elena standing quietly nearby with a breakfast tray. The contrast between the two women was stark. Victoria in her designer traveling outfit, every hair perfectly placed despite the overnight flight, and Elena in her simple work clothes, her genuine concern evident in every line of her face. About the same, Alexander replied, testing the waters. Victoria's smile flickered for just a moment, so brief that anyone else might have missed it. But Alexander had spent years reading micro-expressions in boardroom negotiations. That flicker spoke volumes. Well, I'm sure things will improve soon, Victoria said, already moving toward the windows, her attention elsewhere. The penthouse looks different. More medical. Mr. Thorne needed some equipment for his recovery, Elena said quietly. I can have it moved to the guest suite if it bothers you. Victoria turned, seeming to notice Elena properly for the first time. Oh, you're still here. The dismissive tone made Alexander's jaw clench. Still here. As if Elena were some temporary inconvenience rather than the person who'd been managing his care with unwavering dedication. Elena has been invaluable, Alexander said firmly. I don't know what I would have done without her. Something sharp flashed across Victoria's features before she smoothed her expression back into practiced pleasantness. How wonderful. Well, now that I'm back, I'm sure we can arrange something more permanent. Professional care facilities, perhaps. Elena's face went carefully blank, but Alexander caught the slight tightening around her eyes. The suggestion of removing her from his care felt like a physical blow. That won't be necessary, Alexander said. Elena and I have developed an effective routine. Of course, Victoria replied, but her tone suggested the conversation was far from over. Elena, could you give us some privacy? I'd like to discuss some personal matters with my fiancé. Elena nodded, setting down the breakfast tray. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything, Mr. Thorne. The moment Elena left, Victoria's entire demeanor shifted. The performative warmth disappeared, replaced by something colder and more calculating. Alex, we need to talk about practical matters. Such as? Victoria perched on the edge of the coffee table, close enough to appear intimate, but not close enough to actually touch him. The doctors in Paris. Yes, I consulted with some specialists while I was there. They confirmed what we already suspected. The likelihood of full recovery from this type of injury is minimal. Alexander felt ice forming in his veins. You consulted with specialists? Without telling me. I was being proactive. Someone has to think about our future. Victoria's voice carried that particular edge she used when she thought she was being practical rather than cruel. We need to discuss our engagement. There it is. What about our engagement? Victoria sighed, the sound perfectly calculated to convey reluctant sadness. Alex, I love you, but I'm 29 years old. I can't spend the next 50 years as a caregiver to a man who can't. She trailed off, letting the implications hang in the air. Can't what, Victoria? Can't be a real husband to me. Can't give me children. Can't dance at our wedding or take me traveling or... Another calculated sigh. I've done a lot of thinking in Paris. Alexander stared at her, feeling as though he were seeing her clearly for the first time. This was the woman he'd planned to marry. This was the person he'd trusted with his heart, his future, his name. So what are you suggesting? A mutual separation. Amicable, of course. I'd never want to hurt you, especially now. But Alex, we both know this isn't what either of us signed up for. The casual cruelty of it took his breath away. She was sitting 3 feet from him, discussing the dissolution of their relationship as if she were negotiating a business contract. What about in sickness and in health? He asked quietly. Victoria's laugh was crystalline and completely empty. Darling, we haven't actually said those vows yet. And given the circumstances... A soft knock interrupted them. Elena's voice came through the door. Mr. Thorne? Dr. Peterson is here for your appointment. Come in, Alexander called, grateful for the interruption. Elena entered with Dr. Peterson, but she immediately sensed the tension in the room. Her eyes found Alexander's face, and he saw her read the devastation there with an accuracy that left him feeling exposed. I can reschedule, Dr. Peterson offered, clearly uncomfortable with the atmosphere. No, Alexander said firmly. Victoria and I were just finishing our conversation. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt. Actually, Dr. Peterson, perfect timing. I wanted to discuss long-term care options with you. Private facilities, perhaps something in Switzerland. I understand they have excellent programs for permanent situations. Permanent situations. Not even the courtesy of calling it his condition or his injury. Just a permanent situation to be managed and contained somewhere far from her life. Elena made a small sound, barely audible but unmistakably distressed. When Alexander looked at her, he saw something that nearly undid him. Tears she was trying desperately to hide. She was crying. For him. This woman who had no obligation to him beyond her employment was crying because someone was discussing shipping him away like damaged goods. Dr. Peterson, Alexander said, his voice steadier than he felt. Could you give us a moment? We'll do the examination shortly. Of course. The doctor retreated quickly, clearly eager to escape the domestic drama. When they were alone again, Victoria moved toward her luggage. I'll pack a few things and stay at the Ritz while we work out the details. My lawyer can contact yours about the financial arrangements. Financial arrangements? Well, obviously I'll need some compensation for the 3 years I've invested in this relationship. And there's the matter of the ring, the allowances you've given me, the apartment I gave up to live here. She was talking about their relationship like a business venture that hadn't panned out. Like an investment that had failed to yield expected returns. Elena, who'd been standing frozen by the door, suddenly stepped forward. Excuse me. Victoria looked at her with barely concealed irritation. Yes, I'm sorry, but I couldn't help overhearing. Elena's voice was quiet but steady. Did you just ask for compensation for loving someone? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's face flushed with anger. I don't think the help needs to involve herself in private family matters. You're right, Elena said, her voice growing stronger. I am just the help. But I've spent every day for the past week watching someone struggle with the biggest challenge of his life. And I've never once heard him complain or feel sorry for himself, or ask why this happened to him. But I've also never heard his fiancée ask how he's feeling, or what she can do to help, or even tell him that everything will be okay. Victoria's eyes narrowed dangerously. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're right. I don't know what it's like to be engaged to someone, and then have everything change. But I do know what love looks like. Elena's voice broke slightly. And this isn't it. The silence that followed was electric. Alexander stared at Elena, this woman who was risking her job to defend him, and felt something crack open in his chest. Victoria's voice, when it came, was pure venom. How dare you lecture me about love? You're a housekeeper who's developed an inappropriate attachment to her employer. Don't confuse your little crush with understanding anything about real relationships. Elena flinched as if she'd been slapped, but she didn't back down. You may be right about my feelings, but at least they're real. At least I'm not calculating the return on investment of caring about someone. Alexander watched this exchange with growing amazement. Elena was fighting for him. This woman who had everything to lose and nothing to gain was standing up to Victoria Ashworth, one of the most connected socialites in the city, because she couldn't bear to watch him be treated as disposable. Elena's right, Alexander said quietly. Both women turned to stare at him. Elena's right about what love looks like. And Victoria, you're right too. This isn't what either of us signed up for. He met Victoria's eyes steadily. I release you from any obligation to stay. Keep the ring. Keep whatever allowances I've given you. But I won't discuss compensation for your investment in loving me, because we both know that investment was never made. Victoria's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally calculation. Fine. But Alex, don't expect me to pretend this is some noble sacrifice on my part. You're not the man I agreed to marry anymore. No, Alexander said, glancing at Elena, who was watching him with an expression of fierce pride mixed with heartbreak. I don't think I am. Victoria gathered her immediate belongings with efficient fury, pausing only at the door. When you realize that noble suffering doesn't pay for medical bills or make you any less alone, you'll understand why I made the practical choice. The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. Alexander and Elena stood in the sudden silence, the weight of what had just happened settling around them like dust after an explosion. I'm sorry, Elena said finally. I shouldn't have spoken like that to her. It wasn't my place. Elena, look at me. She raised her eyes reluctantly. Thank you, he said simply. No one has ever defended me like that. She was talking about you like you were broken merchandise. Maybe I am. Elena moved closer, kneeling beside his wheelchair with an intensity that made his breath catch. You are not broken. You are not disposable. You are not a burden or an investment or a situation to be managed. Her voice was fierce, passionate. You are a person who deserves to be loved completely, especially when loving you is hard. The words hit him like a physical force. This woman, who thought he would never walk again, who believed she was promising to care for someone who would need help with everything for the rest of his life, was looking at him like he was precious, like he was worth fighting for. And the most devastating part? She had no idea he was lying to her. Elena, he said softly. Yes, when this is all over, when I'm better, will you still be here? Her smile was radiant and heartbreaking. Mr. Thorne, I'm not going anywhere. As she stood to call Dr. Peterson back in, Alexander realized that his test had given him exactly what he'd asked for. Absolute clarity about who would stay and who would leave when everything fell apart. The problem was he was falling in love with the woman who was staying, and she was falling in love with a lie. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, his business partner. Asterisk, Victoria just called. Says you're incapacitated indefinitely, and I should prepare to assume full control of operations. What the hell is going on? Asterisk. The stakes had just escalated beyond his personal relationships. Victoria was moving to consolidate power in his absence, using his supposed condition as justification. And Elena was humming softly as she prepared for his physical therapy session, completely unaware that the man she was caring for could stand up and walk away at any moment. The point of no return wasn't just approaching, he'd already passed it. The question now was whether love built on a lie could survive the truth. 2 weeks after Victoria's departure, Alexander's carefully constructed world began showing cracks. The first sign came during his morning physical therapy session with Elena. She'd converted his home gym into a rehabilitation center, complete with parallel bars, resistance equipment, and floor mats for stretching. What had started as part of his deception had evolved into something far more complex. An hour each day when Elena's hands guided his unresponsive legs through range-of-motion exercises, her touch so gentle and purposeful that maintaining his paralysis performance became an act of supreme self-control. "The circulation in your legs is actually improving," Elena said, working his ankle through careful rotations. "Dr. Peterson says that's encouraging." Dr. Peterson, who was being paid handsomely to maintain the fiction, had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the deception. Just yesterday, he'd cornered Alexander privately to express his concerns. "Sir, this woman is emotionally invested in your recovery. She's researching experimental treatments, contacting specialists, spending her own money on supplements she thinks might help. This isn't just unethical anymore, it's cruel." But looking down at Elena now, watching her concentrate on his therapy with such dedication, Alexander found himself paralyzed by more than his fictional condition. How could he tell her that every hopeful word about his progress, every gentle touch meant to stimulate healing, was caring for a lie? "Elena," he said softly. She didn't look up, focused on massaging his calf muscle. "What if I don't get better? What if this is as good as it gets?" Her hands stilled. Then she looked up at him with an expression so fierce it took his breath away. "Then we adapt. We find new ways to do the things you love. We focus on what you can do instead of what you can't." Her voice softened. "Mr. Thorne, I need you to understand something. Your worth isn't determined by your mobility. You're not less valuable as a person because you're in a wheelchair." The sincerity in her voice felt like a knife twisting in his chest. She was reassuring him about limitations he didn't actually have, offering unconditional acceptance for a condition that was completely fabricated. His phone rang, shattering the moment. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. "I should take this," Alexander said, grateful for the interruption and hating himself for that gratitude. "Alex, we have a serious problem." Marcus's voice was strained even through the speaker. "Victoria's been busy since she left. She's reached out to 3 board members, suggesting that your condition makes you unfit to continue as CEO. She's pushing for an emergency meeting to discuss leadership transition." Elena's hands had gone still on his leg, her attention focused on the conversation despite her attempt to appear occupied with his therapy. "She has no standing to call board meetings," Alexander said. "She's using her engagement to you as leverage, claiming she's acting in your best interests. And Alex, some of the board members are listening. The Shanghai deal is stalling because Lee Industries wants assurance that you're mentally competent to honor the contract terms." "What kind of assurance?" "They want a video conference. Full cognitive assessment. And they want it this week, or they're walking away from a $2 billion deal." Alexander felt the walls closing in. A video conference would require him to appear sharp, competent, and in control, all while maintaining his paralysis performance. And if Elena was present, "Schedule it for Friday," he said. "I'll be ready." "Alex, are you sure?" "If you're not at your best." "I'll be ready," Alexander repeated firmly. After Marcus hung up, Elena resumed her work on his legs, but he could feel the change in her touch. Something more careful, more protective. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone," she said quietly. "The company will survive whatever happens. But if you push yourself too hard, too fast, you could set back your recovery by months." She looked up at him. "Promise me you won't sacrifice your health for business." The irony was devastating. She was protecting him from a risk that didn't exist, while he was sacrificing something far more precious, her trust, for a deception that grew more painful by the hour. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. Elena frowned. They weren't expecting anyone. "I'll get it," she said, standing and smoothing her workout clothes. "Elena, wait." But she was already heading for the door. Alexander heard voices in the foyer, Elena's polite but cautious tone, and another voice that made his blood run cold. Rebecca. His ex-wife walked into the living room as if she'd never left, her predatory smile intact, her designer outfit chosen to remind him of everything he'd once found irresistible about her. "Hello, Alexander." Elena returned to the room behind her, clearly uncomfortable. "She says she's an old friend. I told her you weren't receiving visitors, but she insisted it was urgent." Rebecca's laugh was crystalline and cutting. "Old friend? Darling, I think I'm a bit more than that. We were married for 3 years." Alexander watched Elena's face carefully. She absorbed this information without visible reaction, but he caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Rebecca," Alexander said evenly. "What do you want?" "To see how you're coping, of course. When I heard about your situation, I had to come." Rebecca moved closer, her gaze assessing. "You know, you look remarkably well for someone who's supposedly paralyzed." The observation was casual, but Alexander caught the sharp intelligence behind it. Rebecca had always been perceptive. It's what had made her such an effective gold digger. "I should give you privacy," Elena said, starting toward the door again. "No," Alexander said quickly. "Stay." Rebecca's eyebrow arched with interest. "How protective. And who exactly are you, dear?" "Elena Vasquez. I help coordinate Mr. Thorne's care." "How domestic." Rebecca's smile sharpened. "And I suppose you live here now? How convenient." Elena's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. "I live in the staff quarters. It makes managing his care more efficient." "I'm sure it does." Rebecca settled into the chair closest to Alexander, crossing her legs with calculated grace. "Alexander, I hope you don't mind my saying, but you seem quite alert for someone dealing with such a traumatic injury. Almost like your old self." Warning bells clanged in Alexander's mind. Rebecca was fishing, testing, probing for inconsistencies in his story. "The mind adapts," he said carefully. "Indeed it does. In fact, I've been thinking about adaptation quite a lot lately. About how people change their circumstances when life doesn't go according to plan." Her smile was razor-sharp. "Like Victoria, for instance. I ran into her in Paris. She seemed quite liberated." Elena's hands clenched at her sides, but she remained silent. "What do you want, Rebecca?" Alexander asked again. "To offer my help, of course. You know better than anyone that I understand what it's like to be dependent on others. And I've learned so much about resilience since our divorce." She paused meaningfully. "Amazing what people will do when they think someone can't take care of themselves." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Rebecca suspected something, and she was positioning herself to exploit whatever weakness she discovered. "I appreciate your concern, but as you can see, I'm well cared for." Rebecca's gaze shifted to Elena, studying her with the cold calculation of a predator sizing up competition. "Yes, I can see that. How long have you been caring for Alexander, dear?" "Since his accident," Elena replied carefully. "And before that? How long have you worked for him?" 2 years. 2 years. Rebecca savored the information. "And in all that time, did Alexander ever mention me?" Elena glanced at Alexander, clearly uncomfortable with being caught in the middle of whatever game Rebecca was playing. "Rebecca," Alexander warned. "Oh, don't be modest. I'm sure you've told her all about our marriage. About how much you trusted me. About how I had complete access to your accounts, your business dealings, your most private moments." Rebecca's smile was venomous. "About how that trust worked out for you." Elena's face had gone pale, but not with embarrassment, with anger on his behalf. "I think you should leave," Elena said quietly. Rebecca laughed. "How sweet. The help is protective." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Alexander, I'll be staying at the Four Seasons for a few days. In case you need anything. Anything at all." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, and Elena? A word of advice from someone who knows Alexander very well. Be careful how much you trust him. He has a tendency to test people, sometimes in ways they never see coming." The comment hit its target perfectly. Elena's face flickered with confusion, her gaze shifting to Alexander with the first seeds of doubt he'd seen since his deception began. After Rebecca left, the silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Is she always like that?" Elena asked finally. "Worse, usually." Elena nodded, but something had changed in her demeanor. She resumed his physical therapy, but her movements were more mechanical, less intimate than before. "Elena," whatever Rebecca implied. "It's none of my business," Elena said quickly. "Your past relationships don't concern me." But they both knew that wasn't true anymore. Whatever was growing between them made his past very much her business. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. *, she has no idea, does she? How fascinating. We should talk soon. I have some ideas about how this situation might benefit both of us. Asterisk. Alexander deleted the message, but the damage was done. Rebecca was circling like a shark who'd scented blood in the water, and Elena was beginning to question things she'd previously accepted without doubt. That evening, as Elena helped him transfer from his wheelchair to bed, a process that required her to support his weight against her body, their faces inches apart, Alexander felt the weight of his deception crushing down on him. "Elena," he said softly as she adjusted his pillows. "Yes, thank you, for everything you've done for me. I need you to know that it means more than I can express." She paused, her hand still on his shoulder, her dark eyes searching his face in the dim lamplight. "Mr. Thorne, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Are you hiding something from me?" The question hung between them, loaded with all the weight of everything he couldn't tell her. He could see the struggle in her face, her growing feelings for him warring with her instinct that something wasn't quite right. "We're all hiding something," he said finally. "The question is whether what we're hiding is worth more than what we're protecting." It wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. Elena nodded slowly, then leaned down and did something that stopped his heart. She pressed a gentle kiss to his forehead. "Whatever you're protecting," she whispered, "I hope it's worth it." As she turned off the lights and left him alone in the darkness, Alexander stared at the ceiling and realized that his carefully orchestrated test had evolved into something far more dangerous than he'd ever intended. He was falling in love with a woman who was falling in love with a lie. And tomorrow, Rebecca would begin her own game, one with stakes he was only beginning to understand. The pressure was building from all sides, and Alexander was starting to realize that when everything finally exploded, the casualties might include the one person he'd never intended to hurt. The woman who'd given him everything, believing he could give her nothing in return. Friday morning arrived with the weight of an execution. Alexander's video conference with Lee Industries was scheduled for 2 p.m., a meeting that would determine not only the fate of a $2 billion deal, but potentially expose his entire deception. Elena had been different all week since Rebecca's visit. Still attentive, still caring, but with a new wariness that cut him deeper than any physical injury could have. She asked fewer questions, offered fewer reassuring touches, and worst of all, she'd stopped humming while she worked. "Your suit is laid out," Elena said, helping him with his morning routine. "I pressed the navy one. It looks best on camera." "Thank you." She nodded but didn't meet his eyes. The easy intimacy they'd shared was fracturing, replaced by professional politeness that felt like a wall between them. Alexander's phone buzzed. Another message from Rebecca. Asterisk, lunch at the Four Seasons? I have information you'll want to hear before your big meeting. Asterisk. Against his better judgment, he agreed. 2 hours later, Marcus wheeled him into the Four Seasons restaurant where Rebecca waited at a corner table, looking like a predator who'd cornered her prey. "Alexander, darling. You look exactly the same as always." Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "What do you want, Rebecca?" She signaled the waiter for champagne, a deliberate mockery, since she knew he couldn't drink before his video conference. "I want to discuss your fascinating recovery process. Or should I say, your fascinating lack thereof." Alexander's blood chilled. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you don't." Rebecca leaned forward conspiratorially. "Tell me, how does it feel to have sweet Elena caring for you so devotedly? All those gentle touches, those worried looks, that growing affection for her helpless patient. Leave Elena out of this." "Oh, but she's the best part. Do you know what I've been doing this week, Alexander?" "Research. I hired a private investigator. You remember Thomas, don't you? He did such good work during our divorce proceedings." Alexander's hands gripped his wheelchair arms. "Thomas found the most interesting things, like security footage from the garage where your accident happened. Amazing how clear those cameras are these days. One might almost say the collision looked choreographed." The restaurant suddenly felt airless. "He also looked into your medical records. Did you know Dr. Peterson has some rather substantial gambling debts? The kind that might motivate a man to participate in certain theatrical endeavors." Rebecca paused to sip her champagne, savoring his growing panic. "But the most fascinating discovery was about your dear Elena. Tell me, have you ever asked her about her previous employer?" "What about it?" "Marcus Blackwood. Ring a bell? He was your business rival 5 years ago, before his rather spectacular bankruptcy. Elena worked for him right up until the end. In fact, she was his personal assistant. Had access to all his files, his strategies, his private communications." Alexander's world tilted. That's impossible. Is it? Thomas found payroll records, references, even photos from company events. Your devoted caregiver isn't just some innocent maid who happened into your life, Alexander. She's someone with intimate knowledge of your business practices, your weaknesses, your patterns. The implications crashed over him like a tsunami. Elena had been in his house for 2 years. She'd had access to his home office, his personal files, his private conversations. If she was connected to Marcus Blackwood. I see the wheels turning, Rebecca said with satisfaction. Makes you wonder what else she might be hiding, doesn't it? Makes you wonder if her devoted care is quite as genuine as it appears. Alexander's phone rang. Elena's name flashed on the screen. Answer it, Rebecca urged. Let's see how good an actress she really is. Mr. Thorne. Elena's voice sounded strained. I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been a problem. What kind of problem? Someone broke into your home office. Files are scattered everywhere. Your computer was accessed. I've called security, but I think you should come home immediately. Rebecca's smile was triumphant. How convenient. A break-in, just hours before your crucial video conference. I wonder what files might have been accessed? What information might have been transmitted to interested parties? Alexander ended the call, his mind racing. Either Elena was an innocent victim of terrible timing, or Rebecca was right, and the woman he'd fallen in love with was the architect of his downfall. What do you want? He asked Rebecca. Simple. 50% of your company, transferred to a holding company I control. In exchange, I keep your little Paralysis performance to myself. Oh, and I make sure Elena's real background stays between us. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice. Give me what I want, or lose everything when the truth comes out. Elena's betrayal, your deception, your mental competency. Imagine how the board will react to all of that. Alexander stared at her, this woman who'd already destroyed him once, who was now positioned to do it again. But this time, the stakes weren't just financial. They were personal in a way that made his chest feel crushed. I need proof about Elena. Rebecca slid a tablet across the table. On the screen were photos of Elena at company parties, payroll documents, even a letter of recommendation from Marcus Blackwood dated just 3 months before she'd started working for Alexander. The evidence was damning and comprehensive. You have until after your video conference to decide, Rebecca said, standing. But Alexander? Either way, your little fantasy is over. The question is whether you want to salvage anything from the wreckage. An hour later, Alexander sat in his home office, staring at the chaos Elena had described. Files were indeed scattered. His computer screen was still open to financial documents, and Elena was moving through the mess with an efficiency that suddenly seemed suspiciously professional. Any idea what they were looking for? He asked. Elena paused, holding a stack of contracts. It's hard to tell. They accessed your email, your financial records, some personnel files. She hesitated. Mr. Thorne, there's something else. Whoever did this knew exactly where to look. They bypassed your security system, knew which files were most sensitive. This wasn't random. Of course they knew, Alexander thought bitterly. If you're the one who told them. Elena, I need to ask you something. She turned, her face open and concerned. The same expression she'd worn while caring for him, while defending him against Victoria, while kissing his forehead in the darkness. Did you ever work for Marcus Blackwood? The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena's face went through a series of changes, surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like resignation. How did you find out? The admission hit him like a physical blow. Rebecca had been right. Does it matter? He asked quietly. Elena set down the papers, her hands shaking slightly. Mr. Thorne, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you failed to mention that you worked for my business rival? Can you explain why you're in my house, with access to everything I own, and you never thought that information might be relevant? It wasn't relevant because I'm not that person anymore. Elena's voice was desperate now. Yes, I worked for Marcus. Yes, I left when his company failed. But I took this job because I needed work, not because of some conspiracy. How do I know that? How do I know anything about you is real? The words came out harsher than he'd intended, fueled by hours of paranoia and Rebecca's poisonous suggestions. But watching Elena's face crumple made him realize he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Because of this, Elena said, her voice breaking. Because I've spent every day for 3 weeks caring for you like you were family. Because I defended you against your fiancé and your ex-wife. Because I've researched treatments and specialists and spent my own money on supplements I thought might help your recovery. Tears were streaming down her face now. Because I fell in love with you, and I thought maybe somehow you were starting to care about me too. The confession hung between them, raw and devastating. Alexander stared at her, this woman who'd just admitted to the very deception he'd been perpetrating himself, and felt something break inside his chest. His phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Lee Industries video conference, 15 minutes. I have to take this meeting, he said. Elena nodded, wiping her tears. I'll give you privacy. Elena, wait. She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes. After this meeting, we need to finish this conversation. She nodded again and left, closing the door behind her. Alexander sat alone in his destroyed office, surrounded by the detritus of his secrets, and prepared to perform normalcy for the cameras while his world imploded around him. The video conference began promptly at 2 p.m. Li Wei, the CEO of Lee Industries, appeared on screen along with his translator and legal team. They were impeccably professional, but Alexander could see the underlying concern in their eyes. They needed to know they were dealing with someone mentally competent. Mr. Thorne, thank you for making time for this meeting. I hope you're feeling well. As well as can be expected, given the circumstances. For 20 minutes, they discussed contract terms, delivery schedules, and quality assessments. Alexander found his rhythm, his business instincts taking over despite the chaos in his personal life. He was sharp, decisive, commanding. Every inch the CEO who'd built a multi-billion-dollar empire. He was so focused on the performance that he didn't hear the office door open behind him. The intellectual property clauses need modification, Alexander was saying, leaning forward in his chair for emphasis. Section 12 specifically. As he gestured toward the screen, he stood up. Not pretended to stand. Not struggled to stand with assistance. He stood up fully, naturally, the way he'd done 1,000 times before, his legs supporting his weight without thought or effort. The silence from the video screen was immediate and confused. Li Wei was staring at something behind Alexander with an expression of complete bewilderment. Alexander froze, realizing his mistake, but it was too late. He turned slowly and saw Elena standing in the doorway, a cup of tea in her hands that was now crashing to the floor. Her face was a portrait of devastation. You can walk, she whispered. The words carried clearly through the video conference. Li Wei's confusion deepened. Mr. Thorne, I thought you were injured in an accident? Paralyzed? Alexander stared at Elena, watching her piece together weeks of deception in real time. Every gentle touch during physical therapy. Every reassuring word about adaptation and acceptance. Every moment of growing intimacy built on her compassion for his supposed condition. All of it a lie. Elena, he started. You can walk, she repeated louder now, her voice breaking. You've been able to walk this entire time. I can explain. Explain what? Her voice was rising toward hysteria. Explain how you let me massage your legs for hours, believing I was helping your circulation? Explain how you let me research experimental treatments and contact specialists? Explain how you let me fall in love with someone who doesn't exist. Li Wei cleared his throat awkwardly. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting. But Elena wasn't finished. 3 weeks, she said, her voice now deadly quiet. 3 weeks I've been caring for you, worrying about you, reorganizing my entire life around your needs. And it was all a performance. Alexander took a step toward her. A normal, easy step that emphasized the magnitude of his deception. Elena, please let me explain. The paralysis was fake, but everything else. Everything else was what? Real. Your feelings for me were real, while you were lying to me about everything else. Elena's laugh was broken and bitter. You know what the worst part is? I was just defending you to myself 5 minutes ago. Even after finding out about Marcus, even after questioning whether I could trust you, I was still making excuses because I thought you were vulnerable. Because I thought you needed me. I do need you. No, you don't. You can walk. You can take care of yourself. You never needed me at all. Tears were streaming down her face. I was just part of some sick test, wasn't I? Some way to prove that people would abandon you if you weren't perfect. The accuracy of her guess hit him like a bullet. Well, congratulations, Elena continued. You proved your point. Victoria left when she thought you were damaged. And now I'm leaving because I know you're cruel. She turned toward the door, then paused without looking back. For what it's worth, I would have stayed. Even if you really were paralyzed, even if you never walked again, I would have stayed and loved you through all of it. But I can't stay and love someone who thinks so little of me that he'd build our entire relationship on a lie. The door slammed behind her with finality. Alexander stood alone in his ruined office, the video conference still running, Li Wei and his team staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. "Mr. Thorne," Li Wei said carefully, "I think Li Industries will be pursuing other partnerships." The screen went dark. Alexander's phone immediately buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Asterisk. "Well, that was entertaining. I assume my offer is looking more attractive now. You have 1 hour to decide before I make some very interesting phone calls." Asterisk. In the space of 5 minutes, Alexander had lost the woman he loved, a $2 billion deal, and any hope of keeping his deception private. He'd wanted to test who would stay when everything fell apart. Now he knew no one. And for the first time since this entire elaborate charade began, Alexander Thorne was truly, completely alone. The lies had finally caught up with him, and the cost was everything he'd never realized he wanted until it was gone. The silence that followed Elena's departure was the loudest sound Alexander had ever heard. He stood in his destroyed office for what felt like hours, staring at the door she'd slammed, replaying her words on an endless, torturous loop. Asterisk, "I would have stayed. Even if you really were paralyzed, even if you never walked again, I would have stayed and loved you through all of it." Asterisk. The cruel irony crushed him. He'd received the answer to his test. Elena would have stayed, but only after ensuring she'd never want to. His phone buzzed constantly. Marcus calling about the failed Lee Industries meeting. Board members demanding explanations. Financial reporters who'd somehow already gotten wind of the story. And Rebecca, texting every few minutes with countdown reminders about her ultimatum. But Alexander ignored them all. Instead, he found himself walking through his penthouse. Really walking, the freedom of movement he'd denied himself for weeks now feeling like mockery. Searching for traces of Elena's presence. Her coffee cup in the kitchen still warm. The Spanish cookbook she'd been using to make him meals that reminded him of home. The small succulent plant she'd bought for his bedside table because she'd read that plants improved recovery environments. In the guest suite where she'd been staying, her belongings were already gone. She'd packed and left with an efficiency that spoke of someone who'd had practiced disappearing quickly from uncomfortable situations. The only thing she'd left behind was a letter on the pillow. "Mr. Thorne. Asterisk, I've returned my key and access cards to Marcus. I've prepared detailed care instructions for whoever takes over your medical management, though I suppose you won't need them. Asterisk. Asterisk, I want you to know that despite how this ended, I don't regret caring for you. You taught me that I'm capable of loving someone completely, even when loving them was difficult. I just wish you had trusted me enough to let me love the real you instead of the person you pretended to be. Asterisk. I hope you find what you were looking for. Elena. Asterisk P.S. Your nephew called yesterday about visiting next month. I told him you were recovering well. I hope that becomes true in ways that matter. Asterisk. Alexander crumpled the letter, then smoothed it out again, reading it 3 more times before the words truly sank in. His nephew. Elena had been fielding calls from his family, protecting him from concerns and obligations while he orchestrated his elaborate deception. Even his nephew, his sister Sarah's son, whom Alexander barely saw but who apparently cared enough to call, had been told comforting lies by a woman who thought she was helping his recovery. The scope of his betrayal expanded beyond Elena, beyond Victoria, beyond his business. He'd been lying to everyone who cared about him, using their love and concern as cover for his cynical test. A sharp knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "We need to talk. Now." Alexander followed Marcus to the living room, where his business partner paced like a caged animal. "The Lee Industries deal is dead. They've released a statement citing concerns about leadership stability at our company." Marcus turned to face him. "Alex, what the hell is going on?" Elena called me in tears, saying something about lies and deception. The video conference footage is already being dissected by financial analysts. And now Rebecca Thorne is calling board members, claiming she has information about your mental state that affects your fitness to lead the company. Rebecca Thorne. She'd reclaimed his name after their divorce, using it like a weapon. "How much time do I have before the board meeting?" Alexander asked. "They've called an emergency session for Monday morning. That gives you 72 hours to explain why the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation was caught faking a disability for reasons no one understands." Alexander sank into his chair. Not the wheelchair he'd performed in for weeks, but his regular leather armchair, and for the first time in years felt truly defeated. I was testing Victoria, he said quietly. Testing her how? To see if she'd stay if I was really disabled. The car accident was staged. The paralysis was fake. I hired Dr. Peterson to maintain the fiction. Marcus stared at him in stunned silence. You faked a spinal injury to test your fiancé's loyalty? Yes. And Elena knew? No. The word came out like a confession. Elena never knew. She believed it was real. She spent 3 weeks caring for someone she thought would never walk again. Jesus, Alex. Marcus ran his hands through his hair. Do you have any idea how this looks? The board is going to argue that someone who would stage an elaborate medical deception for personal reasons is mentally unfit to run a company. The media is going to have a field day. Our stock price is already dropping based on rumors. Alexander's phone buzzed. Another text from Rebecca. Asterisk 45 minutes remaining. I trust you're considering my generous offer. Asterisk. There's more, Alexander said. Rebecca is blackmailing me. She figured out the paralysis was fake, and she's threatening to expose everything unless I give her 50% of the company. Marcus went very still. What kind of evidence does she have? Security footage from the staged accident. Financial records showing payments to Dr. Peterson. Enough to destroy me. And if you don't pay? She tells the board, the media, and anyone else who'll listen that I'm either a criminal mastermind or mentally unstable. Either way, I lose control of the company. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of the disaster. There's a third option. Which is? You get ahead of this. You call your own press conference, admit to the deception, explain your reasoning, and throw yourself on the mercy of the board and the public. That's corporate suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to maintain any credibility. People might forgive a man who made a foolish mistake in love. They'll never forgive a man who lies to them after being caught. Alexander considered this. Public confession meant professional humiliation, media scrutiny, and probably the end of his career as a CEO. But it also meant denying Rebecca the satisfaction of destroying him. What about Elena? He asked. What about her? If I go public, her name will be dragged through this mess. The media will want to interview the woman who cared for me. They'll dig into her background, her connection to Marcus Blackwood, everything. Marcus frowned. Her connection to Marcus Blackwood? Alexander explained what Rebecca had discovered about Elena's employment history. As he spoke, Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching understanding. Alex, Marcus Blackwood didn't go bankrupt because of bad business decisions. He went bankrupt because someone systematically destroyed his contracts, stole his clients, and undermined his reputation. What are you saying? I'm saying you destroyed Marcus Blackwood 5 years ago. It was a hostile takeover disguised as competitive business practices. You were ruthless and brilliant, and you completely eliminated him as a threat. The implications hit Alexander like a freight train. Elena worked for a man I destroyed, and then she ended up working for you, which means either she's the most unlucky woman in the world, or she came here deliberately. Alexander felt sick. For revenge. It's possible. Though if that were the case, why didn't she destroy you when she had the chance? She's had access to everything for 2 years. Alexander thought about Elena's letter, her genuine tears, the way she defended him against Victoria and Rebecca. Either she was the most accomplished actress in the world, or... I need to find her, he said. Alex, you have bigger problems right now. Rebecca's ultimatum, the board meeting. I need to find Elena and ask her directly if she came here to destroy me. And if she did? Alexander was quiet for a moment. Then I'll have gotten exactly what I deserved. His phone rang. Rebecca. Time's up, darling, she said without preamble. What's your decision? I need more time. You've had plenty of time. Either transfer 50% of your holdings to my company by midnight tonight, or I start making calls to very interested journalists. Rebecca, please. Oh, and Alexander? I've done some more digging into your dear Elena. You'll find the information I've gathered quite illuminating. Check your email. The line went dead. Alexander opened his email to find a folder labeled Elena Vasquez Complete Background. Inside were dozens of documents, photos, and records spanning the past 7 years. What he found changed everything. Elena hadn't just worked for Marcus Blackwood. She'd been engaged to him. Marcus Blackwood had been her fiancé when Alexander destroyed his company. The man had lost everything. his business, his reputation, and apparently his relationship with Elena. According to the records, Marcus had suffered a complete breakdown after his bankruptcy and had spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility. Elena had visited him every day. The final document in the folder was a restraining order Elena had filed against Marcus 6 months after his release from the hospital. According to the police report, Marcus had become obsessed with Alexander, blaming him for every loss in his life. He'd threatened to make Alexander pay for destroying everything good in the world. Elena had ended their relationship and moved across the country to escape the situation. And somehow, 2 years later, she'd ended up working for the man who'd destroyed her life. Alexander stared at the documents, his mind reeling. Had Elena recognized him when she took the job? Had she been planning revenge for 2 years, only to be derailed by unexpected feelings? Or had she truly had no idea who he was until it was too late? The questions burned through him, but there was only one way to get answers. He had to find Elena. But first, he had a choice to make. Give Rebecca what she wanted and lose half his empire, or refuse and lose everything while dragging Elena through a media circus that would destroy her privacy forever. As Alexander sat in his penthouse, surrounded by the wreckage of his lies, he realized that for the first time in his adult life, someone else's well-being mattered more to him than his own success. The thought terrified him. It also gave him the first glimmer of hope he'd felt since Elena walked out of his life. Outside his windows, the city glittered with possibilities he'd never noticed before. Somewhere out there, Elena was starting over again, trying to rebuild after another man had derailed her life. Alexander was going to make sure that this time, she had the chance to build something lasting, even if it cost him everything. The question was whether he'd have the courage to tell her the truth about what he'd done to Marcus, and whether she'd ever be able to forgive both of them for the pain they'd caused each other. His phone buzzed one final time. A text from an unknown number. Asterisk, the truth isn't always what it appears to be. If you want to understand what really happened, meet me tomorrow at Cafe Luna on 5th Street. Come alone. Someone who knows what Elena never told you. Asterisk. Alexander stared at the message, realizing that even now, with everything seemingly revealed, there were still secrets waiting in the shadows. The darkest part of this descent wasn't the loss of his company or his reputation. It was the growing certainty that the woman he loved might have every reason in the world to hate him, and he was only just beginning to understand why. Alexander arrived at Cafe Luna 20 minutes early, choosing a corner table where he could watch the entrance. The small bistro was deliberately anonymous, the kind of place where people met when they didn't want to be seen. He'd spent the night wrestling with Rebecca's ultimatum, but the mysterious text had changed everything. Someone who knew what Elena never told him suggested there were still layers to this story he hadn't uncovered. At exactly 11 a.m., a woman in her 50s entered the cafe. She had Elena's dark hair, streaked with silver, and the same gentle eyes. She spotted Alexander immediately and approached with the careful dignity of someone carrying painful news. "Mr. Thorne? I'm Carmen Vasquez, Elena's mother." Alexander stood, startled. "Mrs. Vasquez. Elena never mentioned that I lived in the city, that we speak every day, that I've been watching this situation unfold with growing concern." Carmen settled into the chair across from him. "There's a great deal Elena never told you, Mr. Thorne, just as there's a great deal you never told her." A server approached, but Carmen waved her away. "This wasn't a social call. You want to know if my daughter came to work for you seeking revenge," Carmen said without preamble. "Did she?" Carmen studied his face with an intensity that reminded him of Elena. "Before I answer that, I need to understand something. Do you love her?" The direct question caught him off guard. "Yes. Even knowing about Marcus? Even suspecting she might have deceived you? Especially then." The words surprised him with their honesty. "If she came for revenge and ended up caring for me instead, that means she chose love over hate. That means she's a better person than I am." Carmen's expression softened slightly. "Elena didn't know who you were when she took the job." Alexander felt something ease in his chest. "But," Carmen continued, "I did." The relief vanished instantly. "I knew exactly who Alexander Thorne was when Elena showed me the job posting. I knew what you had done to Marcus, what it had cost my daughter, and I encouraged her to take the position." Alexander stared at her. "You wanted her to work for me? I wanted her to face you. Not for revenge, Mr. Thorne, but for closure." Carmen's voice grew heavy with old pain. "Do you know what happened to Elena after Marcus's breakdown?" Alexander shook his head. She blamed herself. For not seeing his obsession earlier, for not stopping his descent into madness, for not being strong enough to save him. She spent 2 years in therapy, convinced that everyone she loved would eventually self-destruct because she wasn't worth staying healthy for. The words hit Alexander like physical blows. When Marcus filed for bankruptcy, Carmen continued, Elena liquidated her own savings to try to save his company. She sold her grandmother's jewelry, her car, even her mother's wedding ring. Everything she had of value. She gave it all to a man who was already lost, trying to prove she was worth fighting for. Alexander's throat felt constricted. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. You saw a business competitor to be eliminated, not a human being with people who loved him. Carmen's voice carried no accusation, just sad fact. But Elena knew. She lived with the aftermath of your victory every day for 2 years. Then why didn't she destroy me when she had the chance? Carmen smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. Because somewhere in the process of caring for a man she thought was broken, Elena realized that healing others was healing herself. She stopped seeing you as the enemy who destroyed her fiancé and started seeing you as someone who needed the kind of unconditional love she'd never been able to give Marcus. Alexander struggled to process this. She fell in love with me to heal herself? No, Mijo. She fell in love with you because that's who Elena is. She sees people at their worst and loves them toward their best. It's her gift and her curse. Carmen reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It showed Elena and Marcus at what looked like a company party, both young, smiling, obviously in love. This was taken 6 months before you destroyed his company. Do you see how happy they were? Alexander studied the photo, seeing Elena as he'd never seen her, carefree, laughing, her face radiant with uncomplicated joy. Now look at this. Carmen produced a second photo, this one showing Elena visiting someone in what was clearly a psychiatric facility. Her face was drawn, aged beyond her years, her smile forced and tired. This was taken every day for 6 months while she visited Marcus in the hospital. This is what your business victory cost my daughter. Alexander set down the photos with shaking hands. Why are you showing me this? Because Elena would never tell you herself. She spent 5 years believing that Marcus's breakdown was her fault. That if she'd been a better fiancé, more supportive, more worthy of love, he would have been strong enough to weather losing his business. That's not. Of course it's not true. But trauma doesn't care about logic, Mr. Thorne. It cares about patterns. And Elena's pattern is to love broken men who ultimately choose their pride over her heart. The implication was devastating. You think I'll do the same thing Marcus did? I think you already have. Carmen's voice was gentle but implacable. You've spent weeks lying to her, testing her, manipulating her emotions to satisfy your own insecurities. You've proven that your need to control the narrative matters more than her right to make informed choices. Alexander wanted to argue, but the words died in his throat. She was right. Mrs. Vasquez, I want to make this right. I want to protect Elena from what's coming. What's coming? Alexander explained about Rebecca's ultimatum, the media attention, the inevitable investigation into Elena's background if he refused to pay. Carmen listened without interruption, her face growing more troubled with each revelation. So you have a choice, she said finally. Sacrifice half your fortune to protect my daughter's privacy, or sacrifice her peace of mind to save your company. There has to be a third option. There is. Carmen leaned forward. Tell the truth. All of it. Publicly. Take responsibility not just for the paralysis deception, but for what you did to Marcus 5 years ago. Acknowledge the pain your business practices caused, apologize to the families who were destroyed by your success, and use your resources to make amends. That would destroy my reputation permanently. Yes, it would also set Elena free from the guilt she's carried for 5 years. If you publicly acknowledge that Marcus's breakdown was caused by your actions, not her inadequacies, she can finally heal. Alexander stared at Carmen, understanding the true scope of the choice before him. It wasn't just about money or business or even love. It was about taking responsibility for the collateral damage of his success. If I do this, he said slowly, Elena will know that I destroyed her life twice. Once with Marcus, and again with the paralysis lie. She'll never forgive me. Perhaps. Or perhaps she'll see a man who finally chose integrity over self-protection. The choice is yours, Mr. Thorne, but choose quickly. Rebecca's deadline is in 6 hours, and Elena deserves to hear the truth from you before she reads it in the newspapers. Carmen stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. Elena doesn't know I'm here. She doesn't know I've been watching this situation unfold. She asked me not to interfere in her life anymore after the Marcus situation. If you tell her about this conversation, she'll be furious with both of us. Then why did you come? Because 5 years ago, I watched my daughter love a man who chose his wounded pride over her heart. I won't watch it happen again without at least trying to change the outcome. After Carmen left, Alexander sat alone in the cafe, staring at the photos she'd left behind. Elena at her happiest, Elena at her most broken, and implied in both images. The thread of a woman who loved completely despite being hurt completely. His phone buzzed. A text from Rebecca. Asterisk 3 hours remaining. I trust you're prepared to be reasonable. Asterisk. Alexander looked at the message, then at Elena's photos, then out the window at the city where she was somewhere starting over again. For the first time in his adult life, the choice was crystal clear. He opened his phone and began typing a text, not to Rebecca, but to Marcus. Asterisk call an emergency press conference for 4 p.m. today. I have an announcement to make. Asterisk. Marcus responded immediately. Asterisk Alex, what are you planning? Asterisk. Asterisk the right thing. Finally. Asterisk. Alexander stood, leaving Elena's photos on the table for a moment before returning to collect them. Whatever came next, he wanted to remember what love looked like when it was given freely, without tests or conditions or elaborate deceptions. He had 3 hours to write a statement that would probably end his career. But for the first time since this entire nightmare began, Alexander Thorne felt like a man worth loving. The only question now was whether Elena would ever give him the chance to prove it. As he walked toward the door, his phone rang. Elena's name flashed on the screen. Alexander's heart stopped. She was calling him. The impossible choice had just become even more complicated. Alexander's finger hovered over the answer button for 3 rings before his nerve broke. Elena? Alexander. Her voice was different, steadier than he'd heard it since his deception was revealed, but carrying an undertone of exhaustion that made his chest ache. I need to see you. Of course. Where are you? I'm in the lobby of your building. Security won't let me up. Alexander's heart hammered against his ribs. I'll be right down. He found Elena sitting in one of the leather chairs facing the elevator bank, her posture erect but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She was wearing the same clothes she'd left in the day before, and her eyes were red-rimmed with fatigue. Thank you for seeing me, she said as he approached. Elena, I was just about to. Please, let me speak first. She stood, meeting his eyes with an intensity that made him forget his press conference, his ultimatum. Everything except the woman in front of him. I've been thinking all night about what happened, about what you did, about why you did it. Alexander nodded, not trusting his voice. And I realized that I've been angry about the wrong thing. This wasn't what he'd expected. Elena, I wasn't angry because you could walk. I was angry because you didn't trust me with the truth. Her voice was gaining strength. I've spent my entire adult life with men who thought they had to protect me from reality. Marcus, who hid his business problems until they destroyed him. My father, who hid his illness until it was too late to fight it. And now you, hiding your real self because you were afraid I wouldn't love all of you. Alexander felt something shift in his chest. I was testing you. I know. And that's what I came to tell you. I understand why you did it. The words hit him like a physical blow. You understand? Elena's smile was sad but genuine. Alexander, I need to tell you something I should have told you weeks ago. I knew who you were when I took this job. The world tilted on its axis. What? I knew you were the man who destroyed Marcus's company. I recognized your name immediately. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. I took the job because I needed to understand you. I needed to see if you were the monster Marcus painted you to be, or if you were just a man making impossible business decisions. Alexander stared at her, his mind reeling. You've known all along? About the business, yes. About Marcus, yes. About why I ended up in your employment despite the odds against it. Yes to all of it. Elena took a step closer. But Alexander, I need you to understand something crucial. I didn't come for revenge. I came for answers. What kind of answers? Elena was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Marcus told me that you were evil. That you had destroyed his company out of pure malice. That you enjoyed ruining people's lives. For 2 years after his breakdown, that's what I believed. But it never made sense to me that someone truly evil could build the kind of company you built, could inspire the loyalty you inspired, could create the charitable foundation that's educated thousands of children. Alexander's throat felt tight. Elena. So I took the job to see for myself. I expected to find a monster. Instead, I found a man who remembered every employee's birthday, who quietly paid for his doorman's daughter's surgery, who spent his evenings reading to children at the hospital. Elena's voice broke slightly. I found a man who was so terrified of being loved for the wrong reasons that he was willing to live a lie rather than risk being abandoned. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither of them was sure could bear their weight. You said you were angry, Alexander said finally. I was, but not about the paralysis test. Elena stepped closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. I was angry because in all these weeks of getting to know each other, you never once asked me about my past. You never asked how I ended up working for you, what my dreams were, whether I had family who worried about me. You saw me as a caregiver, not as a person with my own story. The accusation was gentle but devastating. Alexander realized she was absolutely right. He'd been so focused on whether she would stay that he'd never bothered to learn who she really was. That's going to change, he said. Is it? Because in about. Elena checked her watch. 2 hours, you're going to face a choice between your company and protecting me from media scrutiny. And I need to know which you'll choose. Alexander stared at her. How do you know about Rebecca's ultimatum? Elena's smile was rueful. Because Rebecca called me an hour ago. She what? She offered me $50,000 to disappear quietly. When I refused, she told me exactly what she was planning to do to you. Elena's voice hardened. She seemed to think I'd be grateful to her for destroying the man who manipulated me. Elena, I'm not going to let Rebecca hurt you. I've already made my decision. I know what decision you've made. Elena reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. I also know what decision I've made. She handed him the paper. It was a statement typed and signed, addressed to the media. Asterisk, my name is Elena Vasquez. I was the caregiver for Alexander Thorne during his recent recovery period. I am writing to clarify several misconceptions about Mr. Thorne's condition and my role in his care. Asterisk. Alexander looked up from the letter. Elena, you can't release this. It will destroy your privacy forever. Keep reading. Asterisk. Mr. Thorne was never paralyzed. His condition was part of a private test of his fiancée's loyalty, a test that revealed Victoria Ashworth's true character and led to the end of their engagement. While I initially believed Mr. Thorne's condition was genuine, I learned the truth and chose to continue caring for him because I had fallen in love with him. Asterisk. Asterisk, I am also the former fiancé of Marcus Blackwood, whose company was acquired by Mr. Thorne 5 years ago. I began working for Mr. Thorne to understand the man who had changed the course of my life. What I discovered was someone worthy of love, respect, and forgiveness. Asterisk. Asterisk, Mr. Thorne's business practices, while aggressive, were legal and ethical. My former fiancé's breakdown was the result of his own psychological fragility, not Mr. Thorne's actions. I take full responsibility for my choices in this situation and ask that the media respect both our privacy during this difficult time. Asterisk. Asterisk, any attempts to exploit this situation for personal gain or media attention are unwelcome and unauthorized. Asterisk. Alexander finished reading and looked up to find Elena watching him with an expression of fierce determination. You wrote this to protect me, he said. I wrote it to protect us. Elena's voice was strong now, certain. Alexander, I don't care about your money or your company or your reputation. I care about you. The real you, not the performance you've been giving the world for years. Elena, if you release this statement, I'll be telling the truth. Finally. Completely. She stepped even closer, close enough to touch him. But I need to know something first. Anything. Why didn't you just ask me? Instead of testing whether I'd stay, why didn't you just tell me you were scared and ask me to promise I wouldn't leave? The question cut straight to the heart of everything. Alexander looked at this woman who'd seen through all his defenses, who'd known his secrets before he'd told them, who was willing to sacrifice her privacy to protect him from the consequences of his own fear. Because I've never met anyone who stayed when staying was hard, he said quietly. Until you. Elena's smile was radiant. I'm not going anywhere, Alexander. Not if you'll have me. Not if you can love me knowing I came to your house with my own agenda. Not if you can forgive me for lying by omission for months. Forgive you. Alexander reached for her hands, marveling when she let him take them. Elena, you saved me. From Victoria, from Rebecca, from myself. You loved me when I was pretending to be broken, and when I actually was broken. How could I need to forgive you for that? Because I wasn't completely honest either. Because I let you think I was just a maid who happened into your life instead of a woman who chose to be there. Alexander pulled her closer, close enough to rest his forehead against hers. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both of us hiding our real selves. Both of us terrified the other would leave if they knew the truth. The difference is that your test was designed to prove people would abandon you. Mine was designed to prove they wouldn't. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I think we both got our answers. Before Alexander could respond, his phone began ringing. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. The press conference, Alexander said, suddenly remembering. Answer it, Elena said. Tell him there's been a change of plans. Alexander answered the call, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. Marcus. Alex, where are you? The media's already setting up for your 4 p.m. announcement. What exactly are you planning to say? Alexander looked at Elena, this woman who'd risked everything to protect him, who'd loved him despite knowing all his secrets, who was offering him a future built on truth instead of tests. I'm going to tell them I'm withdrawing from public life for personal reasons. That Elena Vasquez and I will be releasing a joint statement about recent events, and that anyone interested in the real story should wait for that. Elena's eyes widened. Alexander. And Marcus? I'm recommending you for CEO. Effective immediately. What? Alex, you can't be serious. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Alexander's voice was steady, certain. I'm choosing love over control. I'm choosing truth over manipulation. And I'm choosing Elena over everything else. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Alex, Marcus said carefully, are you sure about this? Call Rebecca, Alexander said. Tell her the deal is off. Tell her that by 6 p.m., Elena and I will have released a statement that makes her blackmail worthless. Tell her that if she tries to hurt Elena in any way, I'll use every resource I have to destroy her. And if she asks what changed your mind, Alexander looked at Elena, who was crying and laughing simultaneously. Tell her I remembered what it feels like to be loved by someone who actually knows me. After he hung up, Elena threw her arms around him, and for the first time since this entire ordeal began, Alexander felt like himself. Not the persona he projected, not the role he performed, but the man he actually was when he wasn't trying to be anyone else. There's one more thing, Elena said, pulling back to look at him. What's that? Marcus called me yesterday. Alexander went very still. What did he say? That he was sorry. That he'd been using his pain over losing his company to manipulate me for years. That he'd encouraged me to take this job because he thought I'd find a way to hurt you, and he wanted me to know that was wrong. Elena's voice was soft. He's been in therapy, Alexander. Real therapy. He wanted me to tell you that his breakdown wasn't your fault, and his recovery isn't your responsibility. The last piece of guilt Alexander had been carrying dissolved. He also said something else, Elena continued. He said that watching me care for you made him realize what real love looked like, and that he'd never loved me the way I deserved to be loved. And how do you deserve to be loved? Alexander asked. Elena's smile was luminous. Completely. Honestly. Without tests or games or conditions. She paused. The way you love me when you're not afraid I'll leave. I'm not afraid anymore, Alexander said, and realized it was true. Good, Elena said, reaching up to kiss him. Because I have a confession to make. Another one? I never actually submitted my resignation. I'm still technically your employee. Alexander laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd felt in weeks. In that case, I'm promoting you. To what? Partner. In everything. Elena kissed him again, and Alexander realized that all his tests and deceptions had been unnecessary. Love, real love, wasn't something you had to trick out of people or earn through suffering. It was something you found when you were brave enough to be yourself with someone brave enough to be themselves with you. As they held each other in the lobby of his building, Alexander's phone buzzed with one final text from Rebecca. Asterisk, you'll regret choosing her over your empire. Asterisk. Alexander deleted the message without showing Elena. He'd never been more certain of a business decision in his life. The empire would survive. The company would thrive under Marcus's leadership. And Alexander Thorne would finally learn what it meant to build something that mattered more than money. A life with someone who loved him not despite his flaws, but because of his courage to face them. The test was over. Love had won. 6 months later, Alexander stood in the lobby of Mercy General Hospital, watching Elena read to a group of children in the pediatric ward. She'd volunteered to coordinate the reading program after learning it was something he'd done quietly for years. One of the details about his character that had convinced her he wasn't the monster Marcus had painted him to be. Mr. Alexander. 7-year-old Sophie waved enthusiastically from her wheelchair. Are you going to read to us today? I think Elena has you covered, Alexander said, settling into a nearby chair. But I brought someone who might be interested in your story. A man in his early 40s approached hesitantly, his face bearing the careful composure of someone still rebuilding his confidence. Marcus Blackwood looked older than his years, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in half a decade. Elena, Alexander called softly. You have another visitor. Elena looked up from the picture book she'd been reading, her face cycling through surprise, wariness, and finally compassion. Marcus. Hello, Elena. Marcus's voice was steady but humble. I hope it's okay that I came. Alexander thought. He thought it might be time. The children, sensing adult conversation that didn't include them, began chattering among themselves. Elena excused herself and joined the two men in the seating area. You look well, she said, and Alexander could hear the genuine care in her voice. Whatever romantic love Elena had felt for Marcus was long gone, but her fundamental kindness toward him remained. I feel well, for the first time in years. Marcus glanced at Alexander. I owe you both an apology. Several apologies, actually. Marcus, Elena began. Please, let me say this. Marcus took a breath. Elena, I spent 2 years after my breakdown blaming Alexander for every loss in my life, including losing you. I convinced myself that if I could make him pay for destroying my company, somehow that would undo all the pain. I encouraged you to take this job because I thought you might find a way to hurt him the way I believed he'd hurt us. Elena's hand found Alexander's, their fingers intertwining naturally. But the truth is, Marcus continued, I lost you long before my company failed. I lost you the moment I started valuing my pride more than your happiness. I lost you when I refused to admit I needed help, when I pushed you away instead of letting you support me, when I made you responsible for fixing problems you didn't create. Alexander watched Elena's face as she absorbed this. The absolution she'd needed to hear for 5 years finally being offered freely. Alexander, Marcus turned to him. I owe you an apology too. Your business practices were aggressive, but they were legal and ethical. I lost my company because I was outmaneuvered by someone better at the game than I was. That's business, not personal destruction. I should have accepted the defeat with grace instead of letting it consume me. You don't need to, Alexander started. Yes, I do. Because my inability to handle losing almost destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. Marcus looked at Elena with profound regret. And it almost prevented you from finding someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Thank you for saying that. There's more. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. This belongs to you. Elena opened it to reveal her grandmother's ring, the one she'd sold to try to save his company. Marcus, I can't. You can and you will. It took me 2 years to track it down and buy it back. It's not about us, Elena. It's about you having something that connects you to the woman who taught you how to love unconditionally. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. I may have lost the right to love you, but I can still honor what you taught me about love. Elena slipped the ring onto her right hand, where it belonged now, not as an engagement ring, but as a reminder of the woman who'd raised her to believe in love's power to heal. There's something else, Alexander said, pulling out an envelope. Marcus, this is for you. Marcus opened it to find a business proposal. A consulting contract? Your bankruptcy meant we acquired a brilliant strategic mind along with your assets. I'd like to hire that mind properly this time, if you're interested. Marcus stared at the papers. You want me to work for you? I want you to work with us. Elena and I are starting a foundation to help small businesses weather hostile takeovers. We could use someone who understands both sides of that equation. It was Elena's idea, a way to transform the pain of the past into protection for future businesses and families facing what Marcus had faced. Marcus looked between them, his expression shifting from shock to something approaching hope. You'd trust me after everything I put you through? Trust has to start somewhere, Alexander said. And Elena believes in second chances. Third chances in your case, Elena added with gentle humor. Marcus laughed, the first genuine laugh Alexander had heard from him. When do I start? An hour later, as they walked through the hospital parking garage, Elena slipped her arm through Alexander's. That was a good thing you did back there. We did, Alexander corrected. This foundation was your idea. The foundation was my idea. Hiring Marcus was yours. Elena stopped walking and turned to face him. 6 months ago, you would have seen him as a threat to eliminate. Today you saw him as a person who needed help healing. Alexander considered this. 6 months ago, I thought love was something people did when it was convenient. You taught me it's something you do especially when it's hard. They'd reached Alexander's car. Not the ostentatious luxury vehicle he'd driven during his CEO days, but a modest sedan that reflected his new priorities. Stepping down from the company had been the right choice. Marcus was thriving as CEO, the business was more profitable than ever, and Alexander had discovered that building a foundation focused on healing rather than acquiring was infinitely more fulfilling than corporate dominance. Alexander, Elena said as they drove home. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret giving up the company? Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering. I regret that it took me so long to realize that being respected for what you own is nothing compared to being loved for who you are. Even when who you are includes someone who faked paralysis to test his fiancée's loyalty? Alexander laughed. Especially then. That story is going to be embarrassing at dinner parties for the rest of our lives. Good thing I like embarrassing stories. They pulled into the driveway of their new home. A restored Victorian in a quiet neighborhood, chosen for its gardens and reading nooks rather than its square footage or prestige address. Elena had moved in 3 months ago, and Alexander still felt a small thrill every time he came home to find her shoes by the door. Inside, Elena began preparing dinner while Alexander sorted through the day's mail. A letter from Rebecca's attorney caught his attention. Elena, Rebecca's legal troubles are officially over. Elena looked up from chopping vegetables. What happened? She's been sentenced to 18 months for attempted extortion. Apparently, we weren't her only targets. Alexander set the letter aside. Her lawyer says she wants to write an apology letter to us as part of her rehabilitation program. Will you read it? Alexander considered this. Would you? Probably. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting what someone did. It's about choosing not to let their actions control your future. Elena's voice was thoughtful. Besides, everyone deserves the chance to become better than they were. It was such a perfectly Elena response, compassionate without being naive, hopeful without being foolish. What about Victoria? Elena asked. Last I heard, she married a tech mogul in Silicon Valley. Second marriage for both of them, apparently very practical arrangement. Alexander moved to stand behind Elena, wrapping his arms around her waist as she cooked. I sent them a wedding gift. You did not. I did. A donation to a spinal injury research foundation in their names. Elena laughed, leaning back against him. That's either very mature or very petty. Can it be both? They ate dinner on their back porch, talking about the foundation's next project, Elena's plans to return to school for nonprofit management, and Alexander's discovery that he actually enjoyed teaching business ethics at the local university. I have something for you, Elena said as they cleared the dishes. It's not my birthday. It's the anniversary of something else. Elena handed him a small wrapped package. 6 months ago today, you called a press conference that changed both our lives. Alexander unwrapped the gift to find a photo in a simple frame. It showed the two of them at the hospital earlier that day, reading to the children, Marcus sitting nearby with his own book. I asked one of the nurses to take it, Elena explained. I wanted to capture this moment, all of us in the same room, working together instead of against each other. Alexander studied the photo, marveling at how relaxed and genuine they all looked. It's perfect. There's something else. Elena's voice carried a note of nervous excitement. Look at the back. Alexander turned over the frame to find Elena's handwriting. Asterisk, Alexander. Thank you for teaching me that the best love stories begin when people stop pretending to be perfect and start trying to be real. Will you marry me? Elena, asterisk. Alexander stared at the words, his heart hammering against his ribs. Elena, I know it's unconventional for the woman to propose, but we've never been conventional. Elena's cheeks were flushed, but her voice was steady. I love you, Alexander. Not the billionaire CEO, not the man who can walk or can't walk, but the person who chooses truth over comfort and love over control. I want to build a life with that person. Alexander set down the frame and pulled Elena into his arms. Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I love you too. Yes, I want to build something real with you. He kissed her deeply, then pulled back to meet her eyes. And yes, I think your proposal is perfect because it's completely honest about who we are and what we want. Elena's smile was radiant. No test this time? No tests. No deceptions. No elaborate schemes to prove anything. Alexander's voice was certain. Just two people who found each other despite their fears and chose to stay despite their flaws. As they held each other on their porch, surrounded by the garden Elena had planted and the life they'd built together, Alexander realized that his story had come full circle. It had begun with a test designed to prove that love was conditional and fragile. It was ending with the understanding that real love, the kind worth having, was unconditional and unbreakable, not because it ignored flaws, but because it chose to see the person beneath them and love them anyway. His phone buzzed with a text from his nephew. Asterisk, Uncle Alex, I'm visiting next month and bringing my girlfriend to meet you and Elena. Can't wait for you to meet her. Asterisk. Alexander showed Elena the message, and she grinned. Ready to be the uncle who gives relationship advice? Are you kidding? We're going to be terrible at that. We lied to each other for months before falling in love. Exactly. We're uniquely qualified to help them avoid our mistakes. Alexander laughed, pulling her closer. I love you, Elena Vasquez. I love you too, Alexander Thorne. All of you. Even the parts that made catastrophically bad decisions about testing people's loyalty. Especially those parts. Especially those parts. They led you to me. As the sun set over their garden and their new life, Alexander understood that the greatest test of love wasn't whether someone would stay when staying was hard. It was whether you were brave enough to be yourself with someone brave enough to be themselves with you. He'd finally passed that test. They both had. Asterisk, what did this story teach you about the difference between being loved for what you can provide and being loved for who you truly are? Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't our perfection, but our courage to be imperfect and still worthy of love. Drop your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world. Asterisk.